All right, so we have started recording. When our guest calls and joins in, those of you who would like to look up some information about our guest, there's also Steven Crowe. Yeah. Not sure what happened to him.
What? Crowe.
He died. He had evidence against the glove. No, he wasn't.
Steven Crowe. That sounds familiar.
You probably won't know who Steven Crowe is.
Stephen King?
But I guarantee when you see the list of the body of work, you will know the work that this guy does.
Is he Steven with the B or the B?
No, Steven with the B, Crowe with an E.
Steven.
What the heck? Crowe. I was like,
Crow.
murder of he's a criminal? He's a murderer? Dang, not this guy, but the Steven Crowe.
Yeah, this is Steven Crowe.
He's a businessman or a refugee friend composer.
Visual effects.
And I'm not for children either. Game programmer. Which one is he? Oh, that's the wrong Okay. Steven Crowe.
The snake bite.
The snake bite.
There we go.
That was weird. You should trace it right.
The volume is up.
A little more than jelly. Shenandoah. Shenandoah.
Now, you guys also remember, you should know a little bit about Steven, because remember one of our other guests talked about him?
Nope.
Nope.
You know, it's gonna be funny. This is being recorded, and we're like, nope. I have no idea who this man
Anna,
was.
Turpin, Crowe.
The
The
dude, the girl who wrote the book.
And she does studio recording and singing.
Oh my goodness.
Didn't she also write the book?
So this is her husband.
Guardians of the Galaxy.
Anna's husband.
The new Dr. Dolittle movie.
Anna Crowe.
What? Maze Runner, Kingsman,
Steven Crowe.
The War of the Planet of the Apes, Triple X.
Did you start saying?
Hello.
Hello.
All right. Can you hear us okay? Let's start there. Let's make sure.
Hello.
Greetings and salutations.
We can see him great.
Right.
You hurt your finger. All right, let's make sure we've got. Okay, so Steven, first question is, can you hear us okay?
Feel it.
So we got our speakers, headphones, okay, video.
We can't hear him. He can't hear us. I think the
Can you hear me?
There we go. All right.
Hey.
Okay, can you hear us okay then?
I think so. Yeah.
Can't
All
say it
right.
again. Hello.
Okay, welcome.
Hello.
Welcome to our class, and thanks for being our first guest of Interviews Day here in 2020.
Great.
So it is a pleasure to have you with us. We were just talking and reminiscing of when we had Anna as a guest.
Oh, yeah. So I'm the first, and you met my wife, so no pressure.
Well, first, go ahead and introduce yourself. Tell us a little bit about yourself, where you're at, and what you do.
Sure. I've got a little something here, and I'm just, is it work if I share my screen with you?
Yep, you should be able to.
All right, let's see. Okay.
All right. Rough draft.
See anything?
Yep.
The guy who does, yes.
Did the joke land?
Yeah.
A rough draft.
Okay, cool. So this is me. I'm that guy. And I was wondering if somebody would be really brave to read for me.
I'll do it.
Who's that?
Me. McKenna over here.
Tell me your name.
I'm McKenna
You're on
Crowe.
screen. Where is the camera?
Right there.
There.
There?
There.
Hi. You're so brave. All right, are you ready?
Sure.
I'm in the business. I'm in the movie business, so that kind of, we kind of do scripts, right?
Yeah.
Oh, boy.
Okay. Interior classroom day. Mr. Bradley Skinner, a dashing fellow who is often mistaken for Tony Stark, stands at the front of his packed classroom of anxious students. A strange and mysterious-looking guy appears on video chat. The guy, old-looking and out of place, appears uneasy as though he hasn't studied for a test. The students, clearly not impressed, are still hopefully optimistic about what's to transpire. Suddenly, a familiar opening line appears on screen, and the guy's story begins.
In a galaxy far, far away.
Yeah. You don't have to read anymore, but thank you. You did a fabulous job. She deserves a round of applause, right? You're all in theater. Right? So my galaxy far, far away is from Bloomington, Illinois. So if I got my info right, you're in Rock Springs, Wyoming. Is that right?
A little left.
You're really close.
Yep, just 15 miles.
Rock Springs is a bit to the left.
Okay, so close enough. Add 15 miles to the trip. And that's what it'd take you to get to my little old hometown of Bloomington, Illinois. So believe it or not, I used to be just like you 21 years ago. Gulp. I was sitting in classrooms just like you, graduating high school. And so this is kind of fun for me. This is my first time, your first guest this year, and this is the first time I've spoken to a high school class. So it's pretty cool. But as I'm dealing with my own midlife crises, it's kind of nice to reflect. But anyhow, my town in Bloomington, Illinois looked a little like this. I'm not sure what yours looks like, but we've got old streets and cornfields and four seasons.
I wish we had a forest.
Is that normal to you too, except for maybe the corn?
No.
It is so dry and brown here, you have no idea.
Well, I come from a land abundant with life and humidity and mosquitoes. So, it really works.
I can relate to this.
I went to Bloomington High School. That's a little shot of it there. I played football. I played a little basketball. I was much scrawnier back then. I've put on a few pounds, as you do. You'll experience that. And and if you ever get a chance to go to Bloomington, Illinois, you do yourself a great service if you don't go to my favorite ice cream spot, Carl's Ice Cream. It's the best soft serve in the world. So don't disappoint me. I don't get paid for this plug, but it's really great. But cut to a couple years later after I graduated high school, as some of you are probably going to do here real shortly. I went to a little old school called the University of Utah. Has anybody ever heard of that school? No. You're pretty close to where it's at. It's in Salt Lake City, Utah. It's in the valley there, and this is just a beautiful picture of the valley, snow-capped mountains, and it was a wonderful time. I met my wife in Utah, and we were married in 2003. It just so happens I was also a car salesman a really long time ago, and I sold her parents a car. And then she asked me out on a date later. And then I got my stuff together. And went to school. And I went to the University of Utah. So when you're in school, as you probably are right now, you've got a lot of questions. You're trying to figure out who you are. what you're interested in, finding out what you're good at, and what you want to do for work. And I was trying to figure some of those things out while I was at the University of Utah. Well, one day, as I'm in my approaching my senior year, I was thinking about potentially going to graduate school, doing an MBA. When I was at the U, I majored in finance, and I also majored in marketing. So I did a dual bachelor's degree while I was there, and I wasn't really confident or thrilled about going to graduate school and doing an MBA. So one day, I was just doing what you do. You're just chilling on the couch, watching a movie. And while I was watching a movie, it happened to be this one here on the left. And sometimes these movies are packed with extras. And so there was some pre-production and post-production things that they put on this DVD where the director, Gore Verbinski, and the producer, Jerry Bruckheimer, were working through a whole bunch of problems. And I had this strong feeling come over me, and it was something like this. I really want those problems. They're trying to figure out how to shoot a scene. They're trying to figure out how to execute a script. They don't have enough money, and there's all these business problems that they're trying to cope with to turn, to make this creative vision happen. And it doesn't matter how big or small the movie is, or how big or small the theater production is, you never seem to have enough of what you want. So they're trying to figure out to do with what they can with their resources. And then as days go by and I'm thinking about this, I'm at Barnes & Noble, and I'm a sucker for a good title, whether it's a film or a book or something like that, though I watch more movies than I read, admittedly. So this book here on the right, So You Want to Be a Producer, was there on the shelf just staring at me, and I go, maybe. And so I picked the book up and I read it, and it excited me because it seemed to me that the industry that I've fortunate enough to have carved a tiny, tiny piece out for myself and my family was something that I could succeed at, because it was a blend of the business things that I'd learned in school, and it was a blend of creative things that I had within myself. So what ends up happening from there is I do apply to grad school. I ended up going here in 2010. I went to UCLA, which is here in Los Angeles, to the School of Theater, Film, and Television. It's a 2-year program, and I was there with 12 other students, and they were from all over the world, from Germany, from Spain, South America. There were MBA graduates from MIT that were in my class, and just a bunch of smart people, and I was just trying to play catch up the whole time. And it was a great program, but as all programs do, they all end, and you've got to go to work. And so I did that. And so the next thing that happens after I graduated was this. The not so fun life, professional life stuff happens. There's a period of time after I graduated that was really, really hard and challenging and rough on me individually and on my family. And that goes when you're trying to pursue creative things. But one day I just met somebody, and he kind of ended up being, in hindsight, sort of a little bit of a big break for me in all the storms that we had experienced. And I started working for a company called Deluxe. Now that happened in 2012, and it's where I work now. I've been there for 7 years. And specifically, Deluxe is a bigger company that owns a smaller company that I work for called Stereo D. And Stereo D is a company where we do post 3D conversion for feature films. And so I'll walk you through a little bit of that here real quick so that makes sense to you. My role there is a role of producer. So a couple years ago, we did a big movie. How many have seen Terminator 2? Just some of you? Oh man, this is too old of a movie for you guys, isn't it? Well, this was made back in the 80s, and it was re-released in 3D. So we worked with James Cameron. Has anybody heard his name before? He made Avatar and a couple of other things. And so we took his movie that he released in the 80s, and we turned it into 3D. And the way that works is we'll get an original shot. This is just a frame from the movie. So you have Arnold here with his a shotgun here, I suppose. And for this movie, there was an extra step that was done because the film was so old. We're all used to seeing things that are a little more pristine. So we did a degrain and a sharpening pass on this image. I hope it shows up for you okay here, that you could tell the difference between the two. So Arnold looks a little bit better. You can see the beads of sweat on his forehead and things like that. Well, after we did that, we still have a mono image, meaning, a singular frame. So we have to turn that into stereo. So part of our process in doing that is a process called rotoscoping, which is a fancy word for tracing a lot of things. And we do this frame by frame through the whole movie. So you can see shapes around his face and his arm and his gun and his nose and things in the background, because those are areas that we're trying to isolate so that we can separate them to create the illusion of 3D or three-dimensional space and depth for you. So after we've isolated things frame by frame with roto, we then create what's called a depth map. And this is a gradient map, so things that are brighter or white appear closer to screen, and things farther away from screen gradient all the way to black. So if you look really close, you can sort of see some shaping in his eye socket and around his mouth and his nose. You can see some gradient color there on his chest, things like that. And then after we've kind of got a general depth map, we can then go and further map and create some shaping around things. So we give the muzzle shape, structure to his face and things of that nature. And all of this happens, and some really smart people do all this fancy creative work. I just help them make sure they get it done on time. And then there's another step after this that we call finishing, but I can't really show you anything because it wouldn't come out anyhow. But when we separate these things, we create a left eye and a right eye. And then when we're trying to composite those two back together, all of these edges around Arnold's face and hand and gun and chest, they have a glassy pixelated edge. And we have to go back in and painstakingly clean that up so that the image you see looks normal. But we basically destroy the image and put it back together again. And then it gets exhibited in places that you might be familiar with, like IMAX or Dolby Vision Theater or Real D3D. So the trick that we're trying to play on your mind when you're looking at it works a little bit like this. You go into the theater and you get a pair of glasses. You see the glasses down there at the bottom, and you see how it says left and one says right. Did everybody see that? Yeah. So the left eye is one kind of polarized image, and the right eye is a separate polarized image. And so they shoot those two images simultaneously in sync to the screen. The light reflects back to your glasses differently in each eye, and then that information goes into your mind, and some beautiful science works, and then you see an image that looks 3D. And that's kind of what I do. So one film that my studio released recently, I didn't personally work on this one, but you might have all seen Star Wars by now. If you haven't, go enjoy it. Go see it in 3D. And for me, these are some of the studios that I've worked with directly in the last 7 years. Marvel, which might be a favorite of your teachers, I'm just guessing. Fox and Warner Brothers, Universal, Paramount. And in the last 7 years, I've been fortunate enough to work on just a couple of films. Now, my first film that I ever worked on was Iron Man 3. Again, that might be a favorite of someone's in the classroom. I'm not sure. So here's some of the films I've worked on. I think I've worked on about 23 or 24 films over the last 7 years. They've all been major feature tentpole films, your big box office popcorn movies. Planet of the Apes was a real fun one to work on with Weta. They're a visual effects studio in New Zealand. Teen Titans Goes to the Movie was kind of fun. That was a little bit different. I didn't do any 3D on that, but we did some 2D compositing for the animation, which was really great. And then just this last year, you may have recognized some of these. One of them still yet to come out, which is Doolittle. I think that one actually comes out on Friday. That's the most recent one that I finished. And unfortunately, it's just a 3D release in China. The rest of the world will see it in 2D. But those are some of the films that I've worked on. So in a nutshell, that's kind of who I am, just a guy who does stuff, and those are some of the things that I do. So that's a little bit about me.
That's amazing. Okay, so do you have any inside track? Are they going to be making an Alita 2?
Potentially.
That film was so great. Yeah, I've never seen it. Oh man, I loved it. So they better make a sequel.
Yeah, my coworker, his name's Dave Phillips. He's a massive fan as well. And when he was in high school, I think, or maybe afterwards, I don't know the time frame just exactly, but he was a big fan, and he drew a monster or a machine of some kind, and the creator of that graphic novel actually included his drawing into some of the original artwork that was done for that. So he was really geeked out to actually have an opportunity to work on it. It was shot in 3D, so we did less work on this movie than we would for a traditional conversion. So maybe to be clear about that, there's two ways that 3D movies get made. They get made natively, which means that on set they're actually using a camera rig that has two lenses, and they're capturing 3D on set, and then they go back and do visual effects compositing and other techniques to then release that in 3D. But sometimes during that process, you don't get what you want, and you have to fix it. And there's no way to fix it natively. So you have to take one of the eyes. We generally take the left eye image, and then we convert it like we would our normal process. So most things are shot in 2D. We take that, we create an additional eye, we create a left eye and a right eye of the same image, and then we go and manipulate it like I kind of described earlier.
So quick question there. If you know the answer to this, how much does a 3D camera that they're using on set, like how much does just one camera like that cost?
I don't know the dollar amount exactly. I do know, generally speaking, it's much more complicated and cost intensive to shoot natively. So part of the trouble is you do have the cost of the camera, which is more. So let's just pretend that their average camera rental is, I don't know, let's say it's $10,000 a day, for example, just throwing out a number for a camera. And they need a rig, so maybe it's a little bit more than that. Again, just making up a number. But the additional costs come in that you have to be very specific and attentive to how you set the camera up and what you're shooting. So the staging of a scene and then the executing of it takes significantly more time, generally speaking, to do than it is to just use a 2D camera and shoot and get whatever you want and when you want. Because you have to calibrate the lenses to make sure that they're operating properly, that the eyes or the lenses are in sync, so that the image is captured right. And it's a bigger rig generally. They're harder to move around. So you have the cost of the camera, but you also have the added cost of just the time in production that it takes to execute a shot. And so that adds up over time. So most people either A, don't have the expertise with it, or B, don't want to do the added expense to shoot it that way. And there's some post-production challenges that you get as a part of it as well for other vendors to work in 3D space versus 2D space from a visual effects standpoint, which is much more complicated. So there's lots of things that just kind of generally make it more expensive, hence why people will do post-3D conversion with a company like mine.
So what are some of the benefits to viewers of filming it natively in 3D versus doing a post conversion?
Some people like the look and feel better of native if it's shot in a comfortable manner. Now things can get too expansive. So the more expansive the 3D, the more divergent the two images are when your mind is trying to put them back together. So the more divergent those two images, the deeper it gets, but it causes more strain for you to look at. So, but what native 3D generally does is you get a lot more fine detail in it because it's shot that way. So in my process in conversion, I can only give as fine a detail as I can isolate the image to give that to you, right? So if and that's dependent on lots of factors. It depends on what the studio is paying. It depends on the time frame at which that we have to execute the conversion for the film. If we have a compressed schedule, we're able to do less than if we had an extended schedule. We could do more and play up 3D moments and things like that. So natively, you get a lot more natural detail, whereas conversion, you can still get a lot more natural detail, but it's not as fine as maybe you would see in a natively shot show. I hope that answers your question.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome.
All right. Are you ready to take some more questions? Are you good?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, absolutely.
Amber, then Braxton.
Okay, so on average, how long do you think it takes you to complete a conversion for any one film?
I've worked on a number of projects that have have had a wide array of schedules. Like, so for example, if I back up here on this slide, War for the Planet of the Apes, we worked on that for about 8 months, and we worked on it in conjunction and cooperation with Weta Digital. So as they finished material, they would hand off that material. They'd also provide us all of their compositing assets. So everything you see on that poster there is fake. The horse isn't real. Obviously, Caesar there isn't real. The snow's not real. The background's not real. It's all created out of someone's fabulous and fantastic talent and imagination. But all of those assets live in a computer by themselves. So Caesar is separate from the horse. The horse is separate from Caesar. In the background, the snow is its own layer. And these things all get put together, you know, kind of one by one into a composite. So for what I do, if we're working closely with a VFX vendor, they'll also provide us those isolated assets that make up that shot. So if I have Caesar by himself, it's less roto I have to do, and I can separate him easier from the snow and in the background. Whereas if I just get the composited image by itself, then if I'm rotoscoping Caesar, what I've also picked up are all those little snow flurries on his fur, which will be very difficult for me to get off of him so that I can kind of have them float around him rather than look like they are embedded onto his fur, if that makes sense, right? So this was a really long process that 20th Century Fox wanted the movie to look the best that it could, so we worked really closely with the vendor. Sometimes that doesn't happen so much, and we can do things in as little as about 6 weeks, a movie can be converted. And that's really fast, but it depends on the state of the film as well. But like your big Marvel movies here, like Avengers or Captain America Civil War, if we back up to Iron Man or Thor or Guardians of the Galaxy, boy, those things go down to the wire. So usually when you see a movie, all of these movies, generally with big visual effects, let's say your release date is tomorrow, the movie likely finished and was in the can and shipping out to the world just maybe 2 to 3 weeks before that. Even this latest Star Wars movie didn't finish until about 10 days before you saw it in theaters. So everybody works so feverishly down to the wire. So we're all kind of like doing things at the same time, but my process in conversion is definitely the last stop in that process. So a lot of pressure there.
Okay. After Braxton, we'll go you two over here.
Hi. I want to know what your favorite project what was your favorite movie that you worked on? Or
That's a good question. My favorite project, you know, I really enjoyed Planet of the Apes here. I just mentioned that one. Part of the reason why is because of how much freedom we had in the creative process of making that. One of my, I really enjoyed Miss Peregrine's Home for Peculiar Children. That was a Tim Burton movie. He was in London during that, and it was great to work with him and just his appreciation for what we did. Another one that was really great is down there in the center, Guardians of the Galaxy was a lot of fun. And that one was actually a lot of fun because the story was a lot of fun, right? Like, I don't know if many of you remember when that came out, it was just kind of a surprise for everybody. And Marvel Studios was really worried about it. They weren't really sure that it was going to be successful. They were very afraid, but obviously it was a hit and everybody loved it. So those were fun for creative reasons. But I will tell you that fun is like a romanticism that you get to have in hindsight sometimes. Because all of these projects, at the end of the day, are hard work. You go in every day, you have a set of tasks that you're trying to accomplish, and you're trying to accomplish them with lots of people, doing lots of different things, lots of moving parts. In my role as a producer, I have to, well, first and foremost, I'm trying really hard to make sure that my client is happy. So that's the studio that I'm working for. Maybe it's the director, or it's someone the director's hired to work in his stead, to make sure that they're happy with things and that I'm on time. If I fall behind a little bit, people get freaked out. That's not good. And these things have a release date and they don't move. And so everybody's got to be really exacting You're working with other visual effects vendors, and they may or may not be on schedule either. If they're not on schedule, that makes what I have to do that much more difficult. If they owe me things like the assets I described for Planet of the Apes there, then if I get those late, there's little I can do with them. I'm compromised in what I've got to do. We've got to find creative ways to solve those problems. I also have a challenge in that my studio is not housed here where I live in Los Angeles. Here we have a smaller crew of client-facing individuals. I'm one of them, obviously. But I also have the majority of the workforce is in 2 locations. They exist in Toronto, Canada, and then they also exist in Pune, India. So I work with them remotely, and their department managers and artists on the floor, and there's hundreds of people that work on these films for us. And managing that can be really nerve-wracking as well. So sometimes you don't get that sigh of relief and appreciation until the end when you see it on screen and you're reminded of, oh, that's why we do what we do. When you're not reminded until you're in the theater and you hear somebody say, oh, that was so cool. You know, when that great 3D moment happens or whatnot. I understand you all do theater. Same for you, right? Your day in and your day out, you had a set of things that you're trying to accomplish, and sometimes your appreciation for what you're doing gets lost in just how difficult it can be. But then you're reminded sometimes, and they're sweet little moments, when you find that you've affected somebody who's watched the thing that you've tried so hard to put together to give them. You know, and then it's meaningful. But, you know, all of these have their sweet spots and their sweet moments for me. And all of them have their really bad days too. So it's kind of a, you know, if fun is a gradient, it's like that depth map. You've got really dark times and you've got really bright times. You got things that are really cool and you've got some things that aren't so cool. But all in all, on balance, you just work through it because that's what your responsibility is. So that's a long-winded answer. Hope that's helpful.
Yeah. After you two, then we'll get to Steven.
Hi. That's a colorful sweater.
Thank you. How long does a single frame take, and what has been the hardest film you've worked on to like stay on schedule?
Okay. So most films are shot at 24 frames per second. So that's how quick they go by, and that's what produces that natural look and feel of motion. There are some movies that are shot at higher frame rates. Some are shot at 60. And there's another film that my studio worked on. It was by Ang Lee that came out it came out this last summer, and it starred Will Smith. And it was called Gemini Man. And Gemini Man was a natively shot stereo film, but it was also filmed at 120 frames a second. So what happens when you go from 24 to 120, that's a lot of frames flipping by your eyeball at 1 second, right? One thing that happens is that at 24 frames a second, it looks kind of natural. It has a kind of ease of grain to it that we're all used to. It looks kind of pleasant. As the frame rate increases, the sharpness of the image also increases because there's less difference in between frames. So you lose things like motion blur. You know, if something goes by the screen real fast, right? Like if I swipe my hand real fast by a screen, you'll see kind of like a blur. My hand won't stay defined as it might if I were moving it slower, right? But what that also does is that it also creates a larger data footprint. So on average, the files that we use per frame end up being around 20 megabytes a frame, right? So there's 1,440 frames in a minute at 24 frames a second. So you can start to do the math of what your data footprint will be. And that's just for one eye. Then we create a second eye. Now, if you go to 120, now you have, you know, it gets much more difficult as you go. To answer your other question, one of my most challenging was probably Captain America Civil War. And the reason that was really challenging was because of the deadline. It ran over its deadline, unfortunately. And we had a lot of just logistical issues with trying to finish the film that were both in part on our studio, but was also in part on the visual effects vendors. And it was just a real challenge. And then when you get in that place, you have to kind of negotiate a little bit. And those are tough meetings to be in. Does that answer your question okay?
Yes, thank you.
Yeah? Yeah, you're welcome.
Okay. My question was, have you ever had a movie spoiled because you were working on it? Like, have you ever like found out stuff before the movie came out because you were?
Oh yeah. All the movies get spoiled, man. Yeah, they all get spoiled.
Which one is the best or worst to have spoiled?
Well, I don't know if I have one I really didn't want spoiled. Like, well, I didn't work on Star Wars that just came out. A colleague of mine did, and I saw some shots in that, and so I tried to stay away from it as much as possible. Sometimes there's real stringent security, and even though we all sign and work under an NDA, a non-disclosure agreement, and have really tight security restrictions at our facility and with email correspondence and things like that, so leaks don't happen. Sometimes there's an extra layer of security in that other employees aren't even allowed to go in the screening room when we're just doing our normal day-to-day. You know, all of us just kind of see what everybody else is doing, just sort of generally, but sometimes those restrictions are in place. And then in some respects, this has happened enough in the last decade where I'm working on something and it's like, oh, there's your spoiler, that you just kind of become professional about it, and it is what it is. And more often than not, we're just making jokes about the story in the first place as we're going through it. And we work out of order, actually. We only can work in the order at which things finish. So sometimes the ending finishes before the beginning of the movie finishes. So it's a real strange workflow, but you get used to it.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome. If it's okay, I'm gonna stop sharing this screen so I can see you guys better. Is that okay?
Yeah.
Sure.
Okay, so I have like kind of an odd question, but like, have you ever like worked on a movie and then like went to a public movie theater with that movie in it and just like hearing like the oohs and ahs and you're like, I did that?
Yeah, all the time. It's awesome. It's awesome.
That's cool. Tristan.
I'm trying to find you guys. I don't see your faces on this Zoom thing. So
I'm hidden.
I'm not sure.
Hi.
Oh, here we go. There it is. Got it.
Hi. What was
Hi.
your favorite part to work on in Miss Peregrine's Home for Peculiar Children?
I really liked all of her scenes, to be honest. I thought she was a great actress, and it was a lot of fun, and it was a fun story. It was nice to have a break from just superhero movies. With all due respect to, hardcore superhero fans, sometimes it's nice to just not see stuff blown up all this time as a solution to a problem. But yeah, she was really great, and it was just kind of a sweet little story. In my opinion, as far as the story goes, and really what I do has nothing to do with the story. I just try to make it nice in 3D for everybody because they've made those decisions before I ever get it. But 3/4 of the movie was really great, and then it got a little weird with, toward the ending, but, most endings are kind of rough anyway. But yeah, she was really great to put into 3D. So, yeah.
Okay. Sarah and then Shady.
Who's got a question? I think that's on the couch in the gray. They had her hand up.
He was in the corner.
Yeah, he's gonna go first. Though.
Oh, hey, man.
Hello.
Hi.
Have you ever used a VistaGlide?
What?
No, I don't even know what that is. Is that something that cool kids use today? Because
No, it's an old mechanism, which I'd suggest searching up.
the Vista, yes, right, right. The two eyes, and it's like a little box, and there's the image that's placed in front, and then it glides back and forth. Is that what you're talking about?
Yeah, kind of.
Yeah, I think I've seen one of those. It's kind of a real old 3D tool, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Well,
I've seen them in pictures. I haven't seen somebody actually use them in. I've never seen one in person, but.
Well, it was used.
Yeah,
on
some old tech.
What's that? It was used in Back to the Future and stuff like that. So.
That's right.
Maybe like you met the guy and you used it in a movie or something like that. So I thought I'd ask.
No, thanks for the question. That's a cool trivia question. I love it.
Okay.
There's the young lady in the gray on the couch there.
Dave's going first.
Okay, she can go first. And then another one here. Oh, hi. Hi. Hi.
Question is have you ever thought about using Skinner as Tony Stark's long lost brother? Or at least a double?
I'll let Victoria Alonso know.
Just put him in one frame.
He's gotta be a stunt double.
Abby, then McKenna.
Who's Abby?
I'm right here. I'm the one.
Hi, Abby.
Okay,
Hi.
so are you working on any movies right now that are like coming out like in the summer or something?
The one that I just finished was Doolittle. That comes out, I think, this Friday. So I just finished that.
Field trip.
But currently, I'm in between projects, so nothing that'll come out this summer.
What's your favorite movie that you've worked on? You did?
Yeah.
What was it?
All right. Can you see me?
They're all great. But some were better than others. I really enjoyed Planet of the Apes just because of. Did you guys hear that? Oh my goodness. Sorry. I thought I turned that off. I'm going to turn something off here. Oh, it is off. Anyway. Okay.
Okay, go for it, McKenna.
Okay. My
Yes.
question is, what is the most challenging part of this career? And also, just out of like curiosity, how was it working on like the Teen Titans Go movie? Because those are like 2D cartoon characters, not actual people.
Yeah, so for Teen Titans Go, I'll answer your second question first. For Teen Titans Go, we didn't do that in 3D. I worked on it from a visual effects animation standpoint. So that was kind of fun. We did a lot of like compositing. And so we would get the various aspects of a shot from various animation vendors. And then we would composite and do a sweetening pass on it for the director. And then we did work on a film where we did put 2D animation into 3D, and it was a SpongeBob SquarePants movie from years ago. You might remember that a portion of the movie was kind of its classic traditional look, and then he comes into the real world, and he's kind of a CG SpongeBob. But both of those parts of the movie we did some 3D with. So it's much more challenging for 2D animation because they tend to not have shape, right? They have an outline and then color, but there's no gradient in that color to give them like rounding to their face. They all have flat faces, no matter how they might be accentuated with a line. But it's really hard to give that. It just looks like odd things pop off. So yeah, it's a little strange. And then your other question was, how hard is it? Was it? Can you tell me your first question again?
Part of this career.
To make it a career. If that makes sense. So I get emails every so often, or a phone call from a friend, or even to get a chance to speak to folks like yourself. And they'll tell me, I know so-and-so, and they really want to do X, Y, or Z. It would be a writer or a director or a producer or an actor or an actress, and have aspirations to do those things. Those aspirations are great. And then I'll usually tell them, if you can do anything else, you should do that. If there's anything else that you're good at in the world, you should do that. And everyone's always like, sometimes it's taken negatively. And well, to be honest, there's a little bit of that in there anyway, but not to scare you. But ultimately, a creative career, no matter what it is, whether you choose to pursue a theater career and all the aspects that entail that, or a career in television or film, or trying to be the next YouTube star or famous Instagram person, whatever it is, there's lots of creative outputs where you can tell a story, right? They all come at a pretty heavy cost. And you have to understand what those costs are. And those costs are certainly their financial costs to that pursuit, and being able to manage those to have a life that you're pleased with and to be able to afford your aspiration. But they also come at emotional costs. They come at social costs. They come at costs to those that you love and that you're trying to have good relationships with. They come at a cost to your spouse or to your children if you have them. And this ball of wax gets bigger and bigger as you take on more responsibility as a maturing adult. And there are things in the world that are just easier to do. For example, it's probably a little easier to find a 9-to-5 as an accountant somewhere and pursue that path and be able to care for yourself and for those that you love and have a life that you're pleased with and that you can afford, versus things that aren't so easy to just get in the door, right? Part of it is that there's millions of people behind you willing to do whatever they can do that you might not be willing to do. And sometimes they're more talented, sometimes they're better connected, sometimes they're less talented, but because they're connected, they get it. And there's all these variables that just don't exist in the same way in other pursuits. And so the thing that I would encourage you maybe in your question, if you're thinking about these kinds of things of what you want to make out of your life that's uniquely yours to do, is to make sure that you've also considered what it costs to succeed at it, and that you're okay with that. Because if you're okay with it, you'll be committed. You won't flip back and forth and be worried, oh, is this what I should do? Is this not what I should do? Because your ability to be committed will give you a drive that will help you to find creative solutions to all the problems you will face because of the path that you've chosen. Just because the path is hard doesn't make it wrong, but you have to be willing and aware as best you can up front to recognize what's hard about that path and be willing to face it with a positive outlook, with a good attitude, with, finding creative ways to make the thing that you want to see happen. But you might find that while you're in that path, the world pushes you around in a certain kind of a way where it never affords you the opportunity to necessarily accomplish the thing you thought you wanted to do. So for example, when I gave you that slide, a lot of not so fun professional stuff happens, and then I just cut to the cool thing. That's some real harrowing stuff for me and my family. And what I mean by that is when I graduated from graduate school in 2010, my wife and I brought our first child into the world. Her name's Naomi. She was born a couple months after I graduated, October of 2010. And then I was unemployed for just about a whole year after that. My wife worked, but I was unemployed. Here I was, hey, I did all the right things. I chose to go to graduate school and incur that expense. That was a choice that we made and a path that we took. It wasn't the only path. And I had to bear the cost of that, right? But I couldn't because I didn't have a job. And I'd apply and I'd apply. The economy it was like the worst time for anybody to graduate at that time, if you remember. Actually, you might not remember because it wouldn't have affected you. But 2008 to 2010 was a financial crisis in the United States and other places. And so it was really awful. So economic conditions existed that the same kind of opportunities that might have existed before that I could have latched onto weren't there anymore. So I was unemployed for a year. I got my first job at Summit Entertainment out of college. And I worked for two attorneys. Summit Entertainment did the Twilight series and things like that. They don't exist anymore because they were bought out by another mini major studio called Lionsgate. But I was there, and you know what? I took that first job. I worked as hard as I could, and I sucked at it, guys. And they fired me. And they let me go. They let me go because I sucked at it. I was not a good assistant. I didn't have the skill set that a good assistant would have, but I got a job. I was like, I got to put food on my table. I had it for 6 months. And they let me go a week before Christmas in 2011. That hurts as a dad who tried for a whole year to try to feed his little girl. And so my wife and I were a little emotional. My wife and I were going to throw a dart at the map and start over somewhere in the world. That's what we were going to do. We ended up finding another opportunity here in LA. We moved from where we were. And that move, I bumped into the hallway to a guy who was in the business. We got to talking, and one day he's like, hey, we're looking for somebody for this entry-level job as a PA. And a PA is a production assistant. You just go get people's coffee, you go get their dry cleaning, you do all these little menial subhuman tasks, or at least they feel that way. And I was like, you know what? It's in an office. I don't have to be on set for 18 hours and get paid $100 for the whole day. Cool, I'll do that. And I decided that I was going to own that job. And that was Stereo D. And 7 years later, I'm the guy who answers to directors and producers and heads of studios because I just worked. I made something out of that little moment. It's been really hard for 7 years. They just don't come out of nowhere. You don't just one day wake up and you're working on a major feature film or the major whatever dream you have. You got to put in the work, and the world shines opportunity on you here and there in these little bitty pieces, and you just hold on to them. So this whole process, this is a really long answer to your question, but this whole process is just that. It is a process to be patient with, to be committed to. Whatever your dream is, you can accomplish it. It's possible. Just know up front what you're getting into and be willing to commit to it. And you'll be successful. It might not look like what you think it's supposed to look like, but you'll be happy with your life, because all along the way, even when it's not becoming the thing that you wanted, it's still becoming what you want, in the sense that you still along that way have the opportunity to choose to make something out of it, of what's presented to you and what you're trying to drum up. So I hope that makes sense. That's a little my soapboxy answer for the day.
That was amazing. Thank you so much for sharing that with us. We really appreciate that. That was great.
Yeah.
And thanks so much for being our guest. That's our time today. That was amazing.
Is that it? Thank you so much. How many of you graduate this year? How many of you graduate this? If you're going to graduate, raise your hands. Keep your hand up if you feel frightened. Keep your hand up if you feel frightened. Yeah? Who graduates next year?
Yeah.
Who graduates
Keep
next?
your hand up if that frightens you. Yeah? Good. That fear is good. That fear is good. So go make something out of it. You have nothing to be afraid of, because I'm sure, as your teacher tells you every day, you are smart and capable people. So you guys are awesome. Thanks for having me.
Thank you so much.
Oh no, I don't want to trip.